Today is 1.1 primary and secondary sources. Your warm-up, number 1, who won the Battle of the Alamo? That is Mexico, led by Santa Anna. Number 2, at one time, Texas was its own independent nation. True or false? That is true. Those should have been reviewed from Texas history. Number 3, put these in order from highest population to lowest population. 1 being California, 2 Texas, 3 Florida, and 4 New York. So like I said, 1.1 primary and secondary sources. So first off, what is a source? A place, person, or thing from which something comes or can be obtained, somewhere you receive information from. Primary and secondary is what we're talking about today. So a primary source is an immediate firsthand accounts of a topic from people who had a direct connection with it. Therefore, they experienced it, they lived it, they witnessed it. It's firsthand. A secondary source interprets and analyzes primary sources. These sources are one or more steps removed from the event. Therefore, they did not experience it. They got their information from another source. Now, there is a such thing called a non-source, and this does not give you the information needed to answer the question you are trying to answer. So I'll give you an example of that. So the question that you're trying to figure out is, why did Columbus sail west? The answer to that is to find a shortcut to East Asia. Now, in this example, a non-source example would be a hat that Christopher Columbus wore on his way to the New World. Now, this is considered a non-source because the hat cannot give you the answer of why he sailed west. Yes, we know he sailed west, but it doesn't answer why. So therefore, his hat would be considered a non-source because it does not give you an answer to what you're trying to find. In your notes, you're going to make a T-chart. On the left side, it's going to say primary. On the right side, it will say secondary. I'm going to give you examples of sources and then tell you if it's primary or secondary. So first example is a text message, and that is a primary source. It is direct communication without a middleman. So if you look at the example I give you here, it's a text message from mom. She says, "I love you, kiddo." And that is direct communication from her to you. That is the same as her saying it to you, her writing it down and handing it to you on a piece of paper. It's direct, one-on-one. There is no middleman. Therefore, you experienced it, and she said it directly to you. So text message is primary. A magazine. Most magazines are secondary sources, and that is because the articles written in them are written by writers. Like in this case, it's not the scientist. This is a science magazine. The scientist is doing an experiment and then giving the information to a writer, and then a writer will publish that information in their own words. Therefore, it is a secondary source. The writer did not actually do the experiment themselves. Now, there are examples of primary sources in magazines. An example of that would be if a scientist was to do an experiment, write an article about that experiment that they did, and then publish it without sending that to a writer or an author or an editor, without it being edited. That would be an example of a primary source. But in most cases, it's a secondary source. A photograph. Photograph is a primary source. That's because there was a photographer there that experienced it live. So in this case, in the example, it's after 9/11. You see the debris in the background. Firemen raising a U.S. flag. There was someone there present that took this picture with a phone or a camera that witnessed it live, and therefore this is a primary source. Almost all photographs are primary. A photograph of a primary source is still a primary source. So unless the photograph has been altered or changed, edited in any way, it's still going to be a primary source. If you were to take a picture of the Declaration of Independence, it is still a primary source because someone was there and witnessed it live and they saw it. Now, if you edit the picture or change it, alter it in any way, then it then becomes a secondary source. Anne Frank's diary. That is a primary source because Anne Frank wrote this herself. She experienced it. You can see in the picture there, it's her handwriting. It's, she believed, or she wrote down everything, that all the thoughts in her own mind. Therefore, every diary is a primary source because they witnessed it. They witnessed their thoughts and their feelings, and they write it down on paper, and it's not someone else's feelings. Now, this is a book about Anne Frank, so it is a secondary source because it is written by someone other than Anne Frank. So this is considered a biography. If this book was written by Anne Frank about her own life, then it would be considered an autobiography, which would then be a primary source. But in this case, this book was not written by Anne Frank, therefore it is a secondary source. Here's some more examples of primary and secondary sources. So I want you to write down the ones that have red arrows beside them. On the left side, we have a song. A song is a primary source, unless if the words or music have been altered or changed in any way. Autobiography. If it's an autobiography, someone wrote the book about themselves, therefore they experienced it, so it's primary. And then speeches. This could be a speech that is given to a crowd. It could be written down on paper. It could be an audio version. As long as it has not been altered or changed in any way, those are all examples of primary sources. Secondary sources, we have biographies like the book about Anne Frank. It was not written by Anne Frank, so therefore it's a book written about someone else, and so it's a secondary source. And then a textbook. A textbook, for example, the history textbook that we have covers about 400 years worth of U.S. history. And I promise that the author of that textbook did not live during all those 400 years. They did not experience everything in that textbook. Therefore, it is a secondary source.